some of the lessons from the summer had 300,000 kids take part in a single lesson. Wow. So the pressure of when 300,000 kids are going to do your maths lesson, we've all been there in our own math lessons, right? I didn't quite explain that as crisply and tightly as I could have done. At the height of the summer, we were in the 0.01% of top users of Vimeo worldwide. We broke their dashboard. They couldn't tell us at one point how much we were using because their scales didn't go high enough for the volume of minute.
I think you've blown Ludo's mind, Matt, because he's just been looking, and it's 15 million hours worth of video material. Which it's sort of the figures are like space, aren't they? They just you just can't comprehend.
Welcome to the Qualified Tutor podcast. I'm your host, Ludo Miller, and I'll be interviewing tutors and thought leaders from across the tutoring landscape to inspire, inform, and motivate you to become the best tutor you can be. The Qualified Tutor community is a safe and supportive space for tutors who love to learn and grow. We offer training, resources, ideas, and a chance to connect with like-minded tutors. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org or find it in the show notes. At a time when the UK heads back into a second lockdown, we are delighted to be speaking to a real leader in the area of virtual classrooms and online learning. During the first lockdown, which started in March of this year, the Oak National Academy was launched to ensure that all students and teachers were able to continue the lessons that they conduct in class on an online environment. We are today joined by Matthew Hood, Principal of the Oak National Academy and the real driver of this incredible project. The kind of numbers that the Oak National Academy has achieved are really quite outstanding. Since their inception in spring of this year, they have delivered 20 million lessons online, and 15 million hours of video have been created and published on the platform, bringing hours and hours of high-quality professional level classroom teaching to thousands of students around the UK. In research conducted by the Oak National Academy into teachers, it was found that reduced workload and an improved quality of teaching and learning were found to be two of the biggest factors of the platform's growth. In this podcast, we will be discussing these 2 points, as well as the future for the Oak National Academy, and how we can create the best conditions for students to be learning this year. Listen in as Matt's incredible enthusiasm and passion for this area shines through. We are also joined by Julia Silver, founder of Qualified Tutor, and Adrian Conway, director of Neon Learning and Qualified Tutor's own lead facilitator.
One of the things we've talked about lockdown is how it's accelerated all our progress, and it's turned the adults into learners again, which is such fun. And for everybody to be able to have this sort of opportunity to bring their expertise to the table, the tech people and the educators, and for us all to bring our expertise together to the table and create something new, at the scale that we're talking about here, is just amazing.
Yeah.
But the thing that we were reflecting on earlier is, you'd been thinking about online learning before lockdown, hadn't you? Because you have a background in it and you'd noticed that niche. It's just that the progress was accelerated. Tell us a bit about that.
So I think it's probably fair to say that I was reasonably skeptical about some of the online learning that I had seen or experienced. There's an organization called Uplearn. A friend of mine, Chris Bolton, works there. And he would tell me all of the incredible things that they were doing, and I would be seeing in pockets just like really, really interesting. They basically guarantee you an A in A-level. I'm an economics teacher by training, so the reason I'm interested is they guarantee you an A in A-level economics if you do their economics course. That's a pretty bold claim, right? And they're delivering on it. They're really successful, right? So, but it's in these sort of tiny pockets. And what I'd previously experienced from large scale work was things like proliferation of interactive whiteboards, which I'm sort of broadly of the view was a waste of money. I know very, very few teachers who do actually use all of the interactive features of the interactive whiteboard. It's just a fancy projector screen. And even when they do, I'm not sure that the pupils in the class are learning more because the screen is interactive, right? Yeah. And we spent like millions of pounds nationally on interactive whiteboards. I started teaching at a time when that was a really big thing. I was very I had a classroom that had one in, and that was quite a big deal in the school, and they gave me one because I was the like new young teacher who obviously knew about technology. So I think I started out as a skeptic, and I still remain a skeptic in lots of places. I partly remain a skeptic because I think there is a overlap between the futurologists and the education technology world. And what I'm really hopeful, and I say the futurologists as, the world's changing faster than ever before. We don't need to learn anything. Just do critical thinking and digital and future and jobs that don't exist yet, et cetera, et cetera. None of which I think is very credible when it's interrogated. So I'm on the government EdTech advisory group, and I was definitely on that group as one of the skeptical people, right? And I think the thing that COVID has forced is a much bigger voice for the education bit of the education technology space. Right. And actually the thing works really well. I think Oak works really well because we have really, really smart teachers and subject leaders who know their subject, who know the pedagogy of their subject, who know like the evidence-informed bets that they should be making in the subject that they teach. And we have technologists who are able to translate that down the line into something for pupils. And the technology, our technology interface is definitely not the most sophisticated, like out there in the system. It's not going to be in the time that we have, right? We don't have lots of adaptive questions. There's not lots of, you come on, you answer some questions about what you learned last time. A teacher explains something and models it to you. You do some independent work, and then we check that you learned the thing that it is relatively pedestrian in the grand scheme of things. But it's simple. The user interface is clean. There is no we've tried to really limit what Professor Becky Allen calls parental load. I don't know if you saw the blog that she wrote. I thought that was really interesting. She describes this parental load as the amount of involvement that a parent needs in the small humans home education, right? How easy is it to log in, get them to the lesson, keep them occupied with the lesson? And she gave us a bit of a kicking in that because we had some quiz questions that weren't quite right. And her argument was like, this massively increases the parental load when that happens because pupil knows they spelt dog right. Google quiz says they didn't spell dog right. We had an issue with capital letters. And that increases parental load. You need to think about when people are at home, reducing and minimizing the parental load. And so this combination of like good evidence-informed, well-designed curricula taught in an evidence-informed, subject-specific way. If you look at our curriculum maps, we haven't tried to make them uniform. Different subjects have different hierarchies, have different internal structures. They need to be respected and dealt with differently. You combine that with really smart, simple technology that's reliable, has low parental load, doesn't fall over. And that's why I think this has been successful, because it's been a really good partnership between those two things, rather than previously, I think, slightly disinterested, a bit skeptical teachers because of a slightly false start on a couple of occasions with interactive whiteboards are going to change your life, or don't teach kids stuff. They'll just discover it through the technology. Just Google it. And technologists not connected to those who are like, well, what schools need is this, that, and the other, when in fact, that's not what schools needed at all. I mean, Adrian and I did a piece of work a few years ago with an organization that basically beamed tutors into our maths lessons. And we just learned a ton from that experiment about, what worked and what didn't work. And we could see and figure out like how those two things working with each other, were or weren't going to be successful in the context that we were in. This is a big, tough secondary modern, effectively on the coast, miles away from anywhere, in a very poor community. Like, if these things are going to work, they need to work in places like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So what's the Oak Academy's come out of what effectively is a crisis, the pandemic, and it's I think it's been very much needed, really. But where do you see it going, Matt? What's the long-term vision for it?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and the really honest answer is we don't know at the moment, and this next half term, running up to Christmas, I'm going to be spending lots of time both looking at the data. We collect some analytics data from the platform. We also do quite a bit of user research. So we watch people using the platform. We talk to lots of teachers about using the platform. It's really interesting just being a fly on the wall, watching a parent and a kid at home interact with it as ways of figuring out what's working and what's not working. We also just want to talk to lots of teachers and school leaders about it and hear from them about whether this is useful or not. I suppose we're a little like Brexit in that with no other alternative in place, on the 31st of August next year we close, right? Like the plan and the arrangement how we have with government is like, we're going to keep our doors open for another year. That's what we committed to doing. And we want to start a little bit sooner than we've done in the past, to give us a little bit more time than we've had in the past to figure out is this resource a useful one for the system or not? If it's not, and there isn't a good use case for it, then it served its purpose. If there is, like, in what configuration and how do we keep that resource available for the system for as long as possible? We're seeing some really interesting use cases. So back to your point earlier, Julia, about, you just put something out there and then people surprise you. Our original intention back in the summer, we made some guesses, right? We guessed that, and spoke to a few hundred school leaders, and they guessed that the situation that we're in was broadly going to be the one that we were going to find ourselves in. Maybe not quite as acute, but there was going to be a rolling pattern of pupils in and out of schools, and that it was going to be even more difficult to provide remote education for those pupils, because you both had to deliver an education for pupils who are in the building and pupils who are at home. Over the summer, the vast majority of pupils were at home, not quite all. And so you sort of knew where your pupils are and you knew the kind of format. It was one format that you had to deliver to. We thought it would be the case that this was going to get even more challenging, particularly in the winter term, which we all know is easily the hardest every single year, particularly when it starts to get dark, right? Like that is a tough gig, and you can't simultaneously teach 4 or 5 hours a day to pupils who are in front of you and then think about teaching however many kids who are self-isolating at home. Like that doubles the work for teachers. And the whole premise, the use case for us was, how do we create something that minimizes what we call the friction between pupils coming in and out of school? Ideally, right, you've got lesson 1, year 7 geology, lesson 2, year 7 geology, lesson 3, year 7 geology. Oh, the kids go home. It's fine. I've got a remote version of lesson 4, 5, and 6 mapped up against my curriculum. And I don't need to like live teach that or record my own versions of teaching that or figure out like some combination of worksheets. Like the curriculum is sufficiently flexible and aligned enough that it reduces that friction. That was our use case, right? That's how we thought it was going to be used. It's been used for that, and that's great, and we're really, really excited about it. What it's also been used for is cover. We are getting teachers getting in touch, being like, basically what I do now is I just send the link to the teacher that's having to cover my lesson, and they now don't need to worry about explaining Pythagoras theorem because they're an English teacher and they've got no idea about Pythagoras theorem. This math teacher from Lancaster is going to explain Pythagoras theorem for them, and I am going to listen to the explanation myself, which will be useful, and then help with the independent task that they're doing. We're seeing it being used in initial teacher training. So we are seeing trainee teachers who can't make it into schools getting together with their tutors, doing a little huddle, observing the lesson, debriefing it afterwards. Now, it's not going to show you everything. It's not going to show you any of the classroom management or questioning techniques that you might use live in a classroom. But it's a pretty good way of like figuring out like how do you explain interest rates. And what you can see is a really good teacher, really experienced teacher explaining that concept. You can also, interestingly, read a transcript of them explaining that concept. You can even nick that transcript if you want and adapt it and edit it for yourself. So we've got this use case for trainee teachers. We've got another use case for pupils, particularly vulnerable pupils. So some pupils with SEND, particular types of autism, for example, who are finding actually a more blended model of some time in the classroom, some time independent learning, reducing what can sometimes be a little overwhelming, particularly when those pupils are out of routine and rhythm because of COVID. We had a really good conversation with the National Autistic Society last week, and we're interested to do some work with them where like this becomes a bit of a feature of the system in the longer term. It's also helpful in situations where, you know, we've all got spaces where pupils go if they are not behaving themselves in classrooms and need to be exited from those classrooms. Like, can we all put our hand on our heart and say that the provision that they get when they're outside of the classroom in that space is as good as it could be? Probably not, right? Like it's a workbook or a worksheet or a comprehension exercise. Well, there's now an alternative for those situations. And we're spotting a whole load of others. I'm really interested in the 900 or so boys. It is mainly boys. There are a few girls, but mainly boys who are in the youth justice estate. They're currently locked in their cell for the vast majority of the day. Like, can we do something useful with them in that space? Like, now that teachers have created this asset, like we have these questions to answer about, like, how do we keep improving it, and what other things might it be useful for?
You know what I love about it, Matt, is the idea that it's I can see why it's called the Oak Academy, because it's growing. And what I love about it is the fact that you've put it out there, and then it's just a case of, okay, there's the resource. Let's see where it goes. And it reminds me of my father was an engineer in Lancashire, and they built a new school. And the feature of this school was that they didn't put any footpaths in at all when the school opened. And they let the children and the teachers walk where they wanted to walk, and then they put the footpaths in. Yeah. And it's a little bit similar, isn't it? It's one of those things where, it's out there. Let's just see where it goes. And I think we're all hoping and praying that the pandemic will disappear as quickly as it seemed to appear. But we're hoping that the Oak Academy doesn't do the same. So people in this podcast, please, if you've not looked at the Oak Academy website, please go there, have a look. There's an amazing amount of resources.
A brief word from our founder, Julia Silver.
About the ideas we touch on here, or gain the tools to take your own tutoring to the next level. The qualification for tutors could be for you. This live online seminar is facilitated by industry experts who, over 4 Zoom workshops, will cover the foundations of teaching and learning and how it relates to you as a tutor. The workshops are full of rich discussions where you'll learn alongside other tutors and connect on a professional level. We will teach you how to be the kind of tutor every child remembers. Visit our community space at qualifiedtutorcommunity.org and sign up now for our transformative course. We'll see you there.
How reassuring this vision is, because, I'm making decisions every day about who should stay in school and who should go home. And it's such a complex decision because of the knock-on effect. If the teaching assistant is covering the lesson, then the other sessions that she's worked, everything gets squeezed in a school, doesn't it? Because there's no leeway.
Yeah.
But what you've created here is some leeway for us, because we've got this backup way to deliver content, to deliver learning. And so the way that you've shown all the applications, what you've done is you've shown all the gaps and how these videos can flow into there. And when you talk about teacher training, what I'm noticing is when you go into a placement in a school, there are so many different factors that you are looking at and evaluating and learning from and responding to. It's quite difficult to isolate the various strands. So evaluating a lesson and the way that a lesson is delivered without any children in the room is quite interesting, because you get to learn just one element of teaching without the distractions and all the complexities of the other element, which is probably something we've never really seen before.
I think, as you know, like most of my background actually, so it's definitely not in ed tech, is in teacher training and school leadership development. And the thing that I think is a massive opportunity here is, so I think it's moderately useful to watch a random teacher teach something, right? Like, I think as a trainee, if you go in, right, and you just watch AD deliver a lesson, like, it's like moderately useful. If there's no matchup between, no offense, AD, there's no matchup between, like,
quite as high as that, Matt.
Right. So if you're an English teacher, you go and watch AD, like, moderately useful, right? He's good at managing a room where there are lots of distractions, drills, various other bits and pieces. You're probably going to learn something along that basis. I think it's more useful to go and watch a teacher who teaches the same stuff broadly that you teach, right? So maths trainees watching maths trainees, English trainees watching English, because even classroom management looks different in a DT classroom and in PE and in maths and in art. Like, everything like should flow through what it is you're teaching. And so it looks a little bit different. The thing that Oak allows you to do is to watch somebody teach the thing that you are about to teach. And that's what we can't offer trainees in school, right? If I go and watch another economics teacher teach, I just have to watch whatever they happen to be teaching. And what tends to happen, again, with trainees, right? Like if you were doing an A-level economics syllabus and they're coming in at the end of a term, I'm probably teaching a macroeconomics module versus a microeconomics module, which I probably covered at the start of the year. Now, that trainee needs to see me teach the thing that they are about to teach. It's no good them at the moment trying to think about, oh, well, may that be useful when I teach that in a year's time, right? They need to see the thing. And so what you can now do is, if you're worried about how do I introduce this concept or this idea or this story or this sound, you can see somebody introducing that thing. And you don't have to do it the first time without ever seeing anybody done it. And you can just pick, you can just literally search and pick and watch somebody do it. And you can copy the transcript, take that away with you and be like, right, I've got some bullet points now for how I'm going to introduce this idea step by step. And I've seen another teacher do it. So this is at least a good version, right? I need to adapt it for my class. I need to adapt it for my context, but I've got a starting point. A total unintended consequence. Think's really interesting.
To state the obvious, then, it's a planning tool.
I honestly think it can help with that. Curriculum, right? Like, I don't think we get to see each other's curricula very often, like from top to bottom. Like, I've never seen like end to end another school's like entire curriculum before this. This curriculum is just school's curriculum, right? Like, the way that we work is we have a group of partners. Those partners take a slice of the curriculum. So they'll take Key Stage 3 mathematics. So Maths Mastery have taken Key Stage 3 mathematics. They've actually taken Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 as well. They spent years developing that curriculum map, and they've just made that available for everybody, right? So you want to see how someone else has sequenced their mathematics curriculum from 4 up to whatever it is, 14-year-olds. Have a download, have a look, see how they order things versus how you order things. I mean, I know one of the battles in maths is like, should you introduce algebra in year 7? Some people like absolutely must introduce algebra in year 7. It is the foundation. Some people like confuses year 7. Don't confuse them by introducing algebra. Stick with them. Like, all of these rich debates that happen within subjects about what we should teach and what order we should teach it in. you can see someone else's version now. Just click on download. They've generously made them available, which is also, I just think, really, really interesting.
It's brilliant. Yeah. Matt, your passion and your love of education, it just absolutely shines through. And I can see you getting more and more animated as the podcast goes on. So what's your motivator? What drives you?
Really good question. I suppose really context specific to where, for listeners who don't know, AD and I work together at the same school, so I've known each other for a long time. So the area in which I grew up, seaside town in the northwest of England, called Morecambe, and I spent my time between there and another seaside town in the northwest called Blackpool, where my dad lives. And as much as I love northwest seaside towns, they have their challenges. There is not a huge amount of work to go around. I mean, the big difference between Morecambe and Blackpool is Morecambe's really fortunate. It has 2 large nuclear power stations nearby, and a big university in Lancaster down the road, which means there are more jobs. Blackpool really struggles because it doesn't have a huge amount of industry or jobs. It has a seasonal tourist industry, which is hurting a lot at the moment. And that means that, there's not, these are not like wealthy, affluent areas. And I grew up in a not wealthy, affluent family in what we call the West End of Morecambe. It's not like the West End in London, I promise you, but you should definitely come and visit. The views across the bay are beautiful. And when I was 11 years old, I got a golden ticket. I got a golden ticket to go to the local grammar school. There are 2 grammar schools in Lancaster, a boys' and a girls' school. And those schools have an incredibly, in my view, like damaging and distorting impact on the provision that is available to all pupils across the area. And of course, right, you can take the story, as I am, of the free school meals kid who got into the grammar school and is sat here on this podcast with you, having a conversation about this thing that we've done and all the opportunities that I've had. I get lots of choices in my life, which is great. And I get those choices because I did have a great education. The teachers in my school were superb. The provision in the school was superb. But nobody tells the story about the kids at the other schools. The school where I'm now chair of governors that AD and I used to work at, which is a de facto secondary modern. If you look at the intake of that school at 11, the starting point for those pupils is way below the equivalent starting point for the pupils at the grammar school. Not because of anything the school has done, but because we have sorted the pupils through this magical test when they're 11 years old. And bluntly, the wealthy, affluent parents send their kids to the local grammar schools. If they don't get into the grammar school, there's a selective Church of England academy nearby, selective on religion, and it's amazing how many people find God in year 6 in our local area. And the intake, as wonderful as they are, come with lots of disadvantages. And for every one kid like me who gets a Willy Wonka golden ticket to go to the grammar school, there are 150 kids who come into my school's intake each year without the same opportunities and resources as those kids. Like, I just don't think that's okay. And that's what gets me out of bed in the morning, because I don't think we need the grammar schools. I think there are examples all over the country now of incredible schools that get incredible results from their pupils because they think really carefully about the curriculum that they teach. They have incredibly ambitious, high expectations for their pupils. They have skilled, expert teachers who they invest in. And all of the parents who would have sent their kids to grammar schools then want their kids to go to these schools, right? Take a look at the pressure on schools like Oasis Academy South Bank, set up to serve a really low-income community at the back of Waterloo train station, which has had to put various admissions criteria in to make sure it keeps serving that community, because the school is so damn good that actually all the MP's kids want to go there, right? Like, because that's where they all live because of going to Westminster. So I had incredible education. I'm really grateful for my teachers. They were superb. But a huge part of it was because I was really lucky. And when I was 11, I got a golden ticket. And I think everybody could get a golden ticket. And there is, that's within our gift. It's within our gift if we think about investing in the expertise of educators across the system.
Yeah. So if you're obviously been very influential, in your thinking in driving you forward, your own education. And I think, the idea of everybody, irrespective of where they are in the country, getting, that golden ticket, that quality education. So how do you think we can move towards that? What do we need to do as a nation in order to achieve that?
Yeah. So the thing that I think the evidence tells us, like the bet, I talk about bets quite a lot, right? Like the bet that I think we should be making as a system, I use the word bet because I mean, we don't know for sure that things work. Some things work in some places, some things work in other places. But the bet that we make as a system is that, or we should make as a system, is that the expertise of the teacher is the thing that we have as schools, like most control over when it comes to closing the gap between poor children and their wealthier peers. We know that the expertise that the teacher has is the thing that makes the biggest difference. There are some things around that are outside of the control of schools. We should keep pushing and lobbying and campaigning for those things to be resolved. But the thing that we uniquely have control over is what our teachers and school leaders know and are able to do. And I think if we talk about teaching and school leadering a lot, I think England is having, wrote about this a year or so ago, I think England is having the best conversation about education anywhere in the world. I think large parts of the world are still focused on jobs that don't exist yet. Just Google it. All we need to do is, have children discover their times tables off the walls because constructivism, I think we're past that. I think that's great. I think we're having the best conversation in the world. I think we need to think really carefully as teachers do about the education of their pupils. Teacher educators need to think as carefully about the development of teachers. What is it that we want them to know and be able to do? How do we structure curricula for teachers and school leaders that helps them to learn that stuff? How do we create networks between them to support each other when they do? That's the second thing. And then the third thing is just, we need to create the conditions where people can do their best work, right? The environment in which people work drives huge amounts of changes in behavior. I say to my team all the time, my number one job is to create the conditions where you can do your best work. And that means removing barriers that are extraneous. It's my job to stand in front of that thing if it's going to be a nightmare for everybody, remove that thing out of the way. But we just need to create the conditions where teachers can teach and do a great job of teaching and love teaching, and blend that in with just having a nice life, right? These things aren't opposed to each other, right? My job is to make sure my team have a nice life, and a big part of having a nice life is having meaningful, purposeful work, and it's also having flexibility that allows you to, my nightmare is when someone asks me, can I go and watch my kids in the nativity play, please? And I'm like, why are you asking me that question? You should definitely go and watch your kid in the nativity play. You don't need to ask for my permission to do that. You need to go to the dentist, You need to, we need to create those conditions and keep thinking about creating those conditions. I think schools are sometimes a little bit behind on this stuff, a little bit over traditional. Yes, you need enough staff on site at the end of the day to make sure all the kids can get safely off the site. Do you need every member of staff? If they finish teaching at 2, do they need to stay on the site? Are we absolutely sure about that? Can we create conditions where things can be more give and take, more flexible? So I think it's conversations, talking about teaching, talking about school leadering, challenging ourselves, looking at the evidence, right? Someone's told you something. Is that true or is that voodoo? You've just done a Myers-Briggs test for your CPD training. That's voodoo. Have a look at it. Look at the evidence. Oh, bad bet. Shouldn't waste any time on that. Second thing, really well-structured training and development. I don't know if you've seen the new MPQ frameworks that were published a couple of weeks ago. I'm sure you have. I think they're excellent. I would say that. But I think that really takes us a step on of thinking about ITT core content framework through to early career training, through to specialization, through to leadership training, through to being an NLE eventually, right? How do we sequence that? We wouldn't accept a non-sequence joined up curriculum for our pupils learning mathematics. Why do we accept it for mathematics teachers? Like, we shouldn't. Like, let's join that stuff up together. Yeah, and then the third thing is we've got to make the conditions right to keep great people in our profession. Like, more experience, like experience alone does not cut it, but experience makes a big difference. We know that from the literature. Don't lose your great experienced teachers because we've not been able to create the conditions where, you're just never allowed to go to the dentist because you've got to be in school all day. Now, people need to go to the dentist, create conditions where people can have a nice life.
We need to reset that culture, don't we? One of the things that's on the agenda at the moment is the National Tutoring Programme. And I'm curious how you see that fitting in, because there's clearly a place for that, and it's been heavily invested in by the government. And it's how you see that fitting in, and what sort of advice would you give to tutors that are going into schools and working with teachers?
Yeah, so I don't actually have a huge amount or really any experience on tutoring, so I sort of tread really carefully here, because definitely outside of something that I know lots about. I'm a trustee at a charity called the Brilliant Club, which does provide PhD tutors, but for the very specific purpose of widening participation at higher education institutions. So a little bit from there, but tutoring in the kind of catch up or more academic sense, much less so. Again, go back to literature. Like what bet should we make around tutoring as we're rolling this out? Well, the first thing is, I think, the government and, EF and others who've been involved are placing their bets in a really good place, right? There's pretty good evidence that small group tutoring, actually really good value for money. One-to-one tutoring, really good. Actually, you don't necessarily get that much more bang for your buck. So, but tutoring, really good bet. So if you're going to try and get kids to catch up, we're onto a good start. What are the things that we know? I think we know that these people are basically becoming a kind of para-type teacher, right? So the things that we know that make the difference for teaching are going to apply to some extent here. So what's really important there? Well, what is expert teaching, right? Like, it's a really, really, really good question. What have they got to have? Well, they've got to have really good contextual knowledge. As a tutor, lots of what they're going to be doing is rapid backwards and forwards with the individual pupil. So we need to make sure that the tutors know the pupils that they're tutoring. They've got to be able to think about the thinking of the person that the kid that they're working with, or the small group of kids that they're working with. I think if we're going to underestimate anything, what we're going to do is whiz tutors around the system, doing little bits with lots of different pupils. And that means that they need to rebuild contextual knowledge each time they do it, which means they're going to be less expert at the thing that they're doing. So, like, don't underplay, I think, the importance of contextual knowledge in questioning decision-making.
I'm going to nudge you. Define contextual knowledge. It's a really interesting thing.
Yeah, a really good question. So I use that as a kind of a general term to describe both like knowledge of the situation you find yourself in and knowledge of the individual that you find yourself trying to move on in some way, shape or form with the knowledge or skills. That both includes so the context involves like where you are, what type of school it is, what other things are going on around you. Like, it makes a difference whether you're in Bay Leadership Academy in Morecambe or Lancaster or grammar school. That context matters. But there is also like lots of pupil knowledge that you need. Things that we would think of as obvious as teachers, right? Like, what makes that kid tick? Any things that you want to say or do that would motivate them? Any things you say or do that wouldn't motivate? Any hooks that you can use? Who to sit them with? Who to group them with? Who to not sit them with? Who to not group them with? All of those things.
It's potential barriers, Matt, as well, isn't it? It's thinking about what their barriers to learning are, because obviously, if there's not a readiness in their mind for learning, then it's going to inhibit it, really.
Exactly. And Peps McRae's new book, Motivated Teaching, I'd really recommend a read for everybody on this. Like, how do we motivate kids to get them to that point where they're ready? And then when we've got them there, Peps McRae's other book, Memorable Teaching, really, really good. Like, how do we help the tutor think about the thinking of the pupil? So this is nothing to do with their behavior. It's all to do with their cognition. What do they know and what do they not know? and being able to like diagnose those gaps and fill those gaps, those are really, really important features of a teacher's expertise. And it's why when we move a teacher from teaching one group of kids to another group of kids, for a period of time, their expertise drops because they don't have that knowledge of those pupils. It's why when you go to a teach in another school, you feel like a newbie all over again. You have these crises of confidence, right? That's perfectly normal. It's because some of your expertise is rooted in knowing the community and the individual pupils that you previously taught, and you now need to learn that stuff again, right? So how can we explicitly teach the tutors about the contextual knowledge? Second thing is they need both the subject knowledge and the pedagogy of that subject. That's, I think, one of the areas where Oak can potentially help, right? I'm going to be doing some tutoring on this topic. I could watch a teacher do some teaching on this stuff, just both to make sure I know it and to make sure I know how to teach that thing, right? That first bit is really obvious, right? You can't teach Pythagoras theorem if you don't know Pythagoras theorem. You can't teach about interest rates if you don't know about interest rates. You can't teach about exchange rates if you don't know about exchange rates. But also some pedagogy associated with that content is really helpful. It's really useful to know, for example, that kids always make a mistake when I'm teaching them about exchange rates because they think a strong pound is always a good thing. Just a common economics misconception. I'm a teacher, I've taught economics, I know that they get that wrong all the time. It's a really helpful thing to know if you're tutoring. They think strong means good, and obviously it depends, for those who don't know economics, it depends if you're the importer or exporter, the strength of the pound. But common misconception, it's good for everybody if the pound's strong. It's definitely not good for everybody, right? So
it feels like a tutoring session in and of itself.
There we go. Yeah, go look up exchange rates. Really. Yeah. Economics not available on Oak at the moment, but will be soon if I get my way. Not currently winning that one.
One of the things that we know about tutoring is that because you're watching the student work it through, you watch where the mistake is. So you develop your pedagogical knowledge by spotting the misconceptions as they arise and addressing them. So at the moment, we're running a course about tutoring for teachers. And that's one of the things that's coming up is that you get this opportunity to read their minds. Yeah. Because you're in such close contact, which is transferable back into the classroom afterwards. And then, of course, the rapport that you're saying. One other thing that's come up, we've had a few really meaty conversations recently where we're pointing out that a tutor who comes in for a block of time and makes a big difference to a student who's disenfranchised in a classroom, which is why they were allocated the tutor, what happens when they leave?
Yeah, really good question. And is always the challenge with like time-limited pots of intervention cash, right? We see this in like place-based initiatives often, right? Money is ploughed into opportunity areas. Like I said, money's ploughed into an area of a particular thing. That's great for the time that the money's been ploughed in. Like, how do we sustain beyond that? I think some long-term targeted resources for targeted tutoring in schools is a really good thing. And I would, you're never going to find me trying to encourage for less of these things, right? Like, I would encourage the government to not make this a one-off thing. I think what we know is that this gap exists and has existed for a long period of time, and this is a really good bet for closing it over the long run. Not least because the private tutoring market is just extending the gap at the other end, right? So even if we're balancing the scales, I think that's a really really good thing. Because you want to avoid the situation where this is available in 1 minute and then not available the next. And something that you also said there just like also triggered me. I would add on to the list of tutors if they're listening, and it's a similar challenge that non-teaching heads of year face. The school that I editor at has non-teaching heads of year, and it's how you show up professionally. And balance this relationship of maybe being someone who is helping that pupil make progress in a subject where they maybe don't have the best relationship with the teacher, without falling into you're on their side and there is this teacher over here. Like, that is fiendishly fiendishly difficult. And every incentive for you in the moment is to want to build the relationship with the pupil to move them on to the next step. And maintaining the appropriate professional boundaries and solidarity, for want of a better word, with your colleagues, particularly if there is a combination of behavior challenges with that pupil and also learning challenges with that pupil, right? That I think is something that's very, very difficult to navigate. I don't have any answers for how you do it, but where I've seen it go really wrong is when you end up with tutors who are basically the kid's mate and on their side against the teacher, and non-teaching heads of year. Sometimes we have this challenge with as well. And I say this with all sympathy to those people who are dealing with some of the more acute and difficult end of the behaviour challenges that schools sometimes experience.
One of our favourite tutors has a line. She says, "Let me see if I can explain to you what the teacher's trying to say."
Yeah.
So she'll look at the teacher's marking and she'll say, "I'm looking to see what the teacher's trying to tell you, and I'll see if I can make it more clear to you," which is making it sort of clear to me that the teacher hasn't communicated it effectively, but she's lubricating the relationship.
Yeah. It's not. Yeah, God, I don't understand that. I don't know what she's talking about there. It's very, very easy to in high volume situations. You're in there 25 hours a week. It's very, very easy for that to slip, and it's really it doesn't. Yeah.
We empathise, don't we?
Matt, it's been a delight talking to you. Just one final question before we wrap up, and that would be: if you had a magic wand, and you could wave it over the educational landscape, what would it look like?
Yeah, great question.
You've only got a short amount of time.
If I could wave a wand over, what would it look like? I think it would just be really commonplace. It would not be unusual. It should be the absolute bog standard. Going back to my point about educator expertise, that of course, a decent proportion of your time right throughout your career is spent learning new stuff that helps you get more expert at your job so that pupils can learn more. And it's not unusual to find someone who has maybe done NPQSL. It's not unusual to find somebody who has specialized. It's not unusual to find NQTs who tell you, they didn't really get an NQT year. They didn't really learn very much. It's not unusual to find people who tell you that their ITT experience, wasn't as robust as, but just, we just take for granted that rigorous, well thought through investment in teachers' expertise is the norm all the time. And I'm going to add on to that. When you walk into schools, the thing that you hear all the time is teachers talking about teaching. I think loads of teachers are talking about what it is that they're doing and interrogating those things based on what the literature is telling us. I have absolutely every confidence that we can be the best education system in the world if we become the best place in the world to be a teacher. That should be our objective, right? How do we become the best place in the world to be a teacher? And if we can do that, we will have the best, by definition, have the best education system in the world.
Thanks, Matt. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Great. Thank you for having me. Really great to spend some time with you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. And you, take care.
Thanks, Matt.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to the Qualified Tutor podcast, where tutors share their expertise to support the tutoring community. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join our Qualified Tutor community at www.qualifiedtutorcommunity.org or find it in the show notes below. We exist to connect, share, and learn with you because tutoring is a small job that makes a big difference.